Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. My name is Andrew Claudio, aka GMAC. Happy New Year, and it is time to preview another Knicks matchup, this time on New Year's Day/night against the Utah Jazz, a team that did beat the Knicks earlier on in the season, but only has 6 other wins to account for during this season, in which the mission has been very clear. A race for the white Cooper flag at the top of the NBA draft. They currently sit at 7-24 at the top. At the top of the lottery, sit at 7-24 with the 5th best lottery odds. That's what I was trying to get out there. This is a team that has made it clear that they're potentially tanking, and yet the Knicks lost to them last time. So I have no idea how to preview this matchup in which the Knicks should be favored. They are 14.5-point favorites at the moment. And, you know, we'll see what happens against this Jazz team that beat them in their last game. And joining me to preview this matchup against the Utah Jazz, lucky for him, and we did talk about this off the air, he didn't make the trip to New York on New Year's Eve, so that way he'd get stuck in New York in the chaos of New Year's Eve into New Year's Day. But from the Salt Lake Tribune, Mr. Andy Larsen. Andy, welcome back to the Knicks Film School Podcast.
Hey, thanks again for having me. And yeah, we had to save some money somewhere, and it would have been like $1,000 or more to get to New York for this game. So this one we're watching from the friendly confines of my living room.
There you go. Well, Happy New Year. First of all, thank you for spending New Year's Day with me. Of course, the place you always want to spend New Year's Day, doing a podcast about the New York Knicks. I mentioned to you this before we went live, that because of the turnaround and the game tonight, look, this is a 14.5-point favorite. The shot quality of the last game, the shot quality chart says the Knicks got good looks and missed them. The Jazz got okay looks and hit everything in the last game. I will say that they did play a lot tougher. This is a team that likes to switch. So I am expecting. Here's what I'll say. I like the Jazz to cover tonight is my initial thought. And I guess my only question about the game is my neurosis as a fan expecting them to cover misguided. Or do you think the Jazz potentially, I mean, obviously they lost 4 straight, they're 7-24, but they could give the Knicks a game tonight?
Yeah, look, I think they can. And this Jazz team has been playing some pretty reasonable basketball over the last 2 weeks. I mean, against the Cleveland Cavaliers, I think they lost by 9, but really kept that game close for most of it. And then have like 2 or 3 or 4-point losses since then, So like, even though they have lost 4 or 5 in a row now, they have been relatively close contests, right? And then they do have wins against the Pistons and Nets, which obviously Knicks a better team then. But in terms of when the spread is 14 points, yeah, if the Jazz play like they have been playing, their offense has been on fire, and so they should be able to kind of score with the Knicks at least, and then the defense ultimately will probably allow Jalen and Cat and whoever else to go off, but. I don't necessarily expect this one to be a blowout just because, again, the Jazz haven't played in a real blowout in at least a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that alone is enough for me to say shout out to our friends at BetUS. If you want to take the points for the Jazz, you can, while not technically betting against the Knicks. I have respect for Will Hardy. I have respect for this Jazz team. I know they're 7-24. Knicks fans, I hear it when I say it. I know they're 7-24. This isn't paranoia. The Knicks have had a habit of coming out slow in games. This is a team, I think, that is a little bit tired. There's been some travel over the course of the last couple. I mean, during this winning streak, even they've been, they went to DC for 4 days randomly for not even a home at home. Just they were in DC on Saturday and then DC on Monday, with a trip to Orlando right before it. So, we'll see who bears the effects of a team that has to take a trip on New Year's Eve back to New York, while the Jazz obviously making the longer trip. So I mentioned to you that we would talk a little transactions, what the Jazz might be doing. As I mentioned, they have waived the white flag, the white Cooper flag, as it would be, for this draft, and they're 7-24, 5th, but yet that's only the 5th best lottery odds. There's 4 other teams with worse records than them this season. Shout out to said Washington Wizards. Let's start here. Going into the season, the messages you were getting out, or I guess the message you were getting out of the Jazz front office and the Jazz organization as a whole is 7-24 expected.
Yeah, it is 100%. Like, this team is trying to tank, right? Like, I think that's fair to say. I think that's clear from what they told us. That's clear from what the actions they have taken rotationally and with the injury report, and even with the roster, right? Like, clearly they're not trying to win games this year. And as you know, with tanking teams, like, that doesn't mean the coaches are trying to lose every game, and that certainly doesn't mean the players are trying to lose. But that being said, like, that is the reality of the Jazz in 2025.
So that then leads to specifically some questions about certain players. And look, the first time we met, Andy, was when the Knicks tried to trade for Donovan Mitchell, and it seemed as if the negotiations, the back and forth, whether it be with Danny Ainge, whether it be with the actual GM of the team, it seemed as if it got to a point that the Knicks were trying to play hardball with one of the best negotiators in the NBA. And then Danny went and found a deal in Cleveland that he eventually was the one he wanted, like got 3 unprotected firsts and walked away with the deal that he wanted. And then that's kind of guided from a New York side of things, our perspective on, okay, well, if we want Walker Kessler, we got to deal with the negotiating tactics of Danny Ainge. If we want Jordan Clarkson last year at the deadline, same principle applies. Let's start with Walker Kessler. I've heard anything from he wants 2 firsts to could be had for a couple second or 1 first. Do you think he's available? First of all, how realistically available is he? And then what do you think the compensation, a fair compensation, would potentially be?
I think it's a weird situation because this is a young developing team, and ideally you keep your young players that are good, right? Like, and of all the young players that the Jazz have, Walker Kessler is by far the best player. He's an incredible rim protector. Is an incredible offensive rebounder, does some really, really awesome things on the court. Given that, I do suspect like there is probably a price that could be paid. And yeah, I think it is kind of in that realm of 2 unprotected firsts. I don't think that the Jazz are like excited to give up on Walker Kessler. I don't think that, like, there were some reports, I don't know, what was it, 6 months ago, that like the relationship between the Jazz and Walker was floundering. I don't think that's really the case. I think he was maybe frustrated at coming off the bench at times last year. That's no longer the deal, right? Like, so whatever kind of was between them, I think has largely been rectified. But yeah, I do think that it's possible to trade for him, just because you're probably a year and a half out from extending him and paying him. I don't know what the right price is for Walker, but 20 to 25 million a year or something like that. Like,
yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're not getting kind of the surplus value that you're currently getting now, right? But for the Jazz, like, he really could be the center for the next 10 years and could be the center on the next good Jazz team. So I think it's a conversation they're willing to have, but I do think would be an expensive price, and I think pretty rightfully so for where the Jazz stand.
So, I mean, look, that makes sense to me too. Which is why the interest and the availability of him during the summer when the Knicks were looking for a center just flat out confused me. And just from being at Summer League and that being part of the conversation around the Jazz, it's like, okay, I guess Walker Kessler is available. We'll see what happens. I mean, you tell me if I'm reading this right. It does seem like sometimes the Jazz front office just puts out a name just to see if a crazy offer comes back. Not that they're actually available, but like, hey, everybody's available for the right price when you're not contending, right?
Yeah, I mean, it feels feels that way with Danny Ainge teams for whatever reason, and I don't know how much of it is true. Like, I was talking to the front office guy once, and he said, we make so few outgoing calls. We get a ton of incoming calls. And it's like, okay, first of all, that's obviously what you're going to say if you're selling your prospects to the media, right? Or your player, right? Like, but I also kind of believe it, right? Like, I especially in this case, right? Where, again, it just does make sense for the Jazz to keep Walker Kessler in a way that, like, the other guys on this roster, right, the veterans, it makes sense for the Jazz to trade Colin Sexton or Jordan Clarkson or John Collins or whatever, because those are established veterans who probably aren't going to be on the next good Jazz team. Did I lose you?
I got you. I hear you. I just don't see you.
Oh, I think I bumped my wire here, and so
You're good. You're good. We work with technical difficulties live. Oh, okay. Now we got a different angle of Andy Larsen. Even better.
let me switch it real quick.
You're good. You're good. I can respond to the. I could lead it to the next question if you want while you work out the
go ahead, please.
And look, the reality of the situation, and I've talked with Spence Checketts about this the last time he was here, is that when you're in this type of period of time that your franchise is going through, where you're not necessarily looking to contend, looking to get better at each deadline, it works itself out that you can make a move like you did in the offseason in extending Markkanen. You do have a core piece to build around. And now you're just seeing what the rest looks like. Like for years, Knicks fans, we went through seeing what Mitchell Robinson was available for. And we're now like 8 years into his career and still wondering
right.
what he's available for. And this might actually be the year that they trade Mitch. We'll see what happens at the deadline. But I think that's the beauty of the process to bring up what happened in Philly. But every franchise goes through a process, and this is part of it, like figuring out who your keepers are. And I would suspect that he's a keeper, Walker Kessler. The three guys that I do want to talk about that I would assume are not, although I do have a question about one of them. Let's start with John Collins. I know John Collins is going to miss this game. John Collins with a left hip contusion. I mean, you could speak to the severity of it, how significant of an injury that is, or whether he's just potentially a deadline casualty soon. Let's just say that. How do you expect him to be on the team after the deadline?
I mean, I think the Jazz will explore the possibility of trading him, and again, the same is true for the other veteran guys who you're probably about to mention. But I don't know that there's for his, he makes $26 million a year, and it's hard to find a matching contract for $26 million a year that doesn't make the team worse than, if you're sending out and you're just receiving John Collins, who I think
right.
has been a useful player and has certainly improved this year compared to last year, where I thought he was legitimately damaging to the Jazz in some real ways. I think this year he's played a lot better, but in the end, like, he still doesn't defend. He's still not a playmaker. He does some nice things. He can shoot and he can finish at the rim, and he can rebound really well. It's just like, I don't know that if you look at the analytics on John Collins, that the value adds up to his contract. And so ultimately, I don't know that I expect a lot of teams to give up something for John Collins. And I don't know that, I think the Jazz would be willing to acquire, if you could trade John Collins for a first, I think the Jazz would probably do that. It's just whether or not teams are willing to offer that. And, we know kind of from the Atlanta days what John Collins' value is in the market, and it's pretty flat, so that's kind of what I see with him and these deadline conversations.
So I'm going to pull up a super chat real quick because it's about a thing we already talked about, but I want to make sure I honor it. From Dom Cappuccino. Yeah. Thank you, Dom, for the super chat. He says, "Hi, Andy. I loved your stuff during the summer of Donovan, as we call it in New York. Do you foresee a team caving into Danny Ainge's trade demands of Kessler before the deadline, or does Kessler remain?" We basically we discussed that. What might happen is that he's a keeper, and we'll see what if unless the right offer comes along and they cave to it, Yeah,
and I would also say, like, the actual picks need to make sense too, right? Like, where I think the Knicks have a real cool future here of kind of what they've been able to build, right? Like, and I'm not sure, you know better than I, what are the picks that the Knicks have available right now to trade?
They have a swap in 2030.
Okay.
They have a swap in, I believe it's a swap in 2030. And then they have the Washington Wizards protected first. That is going to eventually convert to 2 seconds. They traded every pick, everything that wasn't nailed down to the floor this offseason, if it seems like so.
Which makes sense, right? Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, from a Jazz point of view, that doesn't appeal in a way that, you know, the Lakers are also interested in Walker Kessler, right? And so, and they have these, you know, upcoming picks that are in the window after LeBron James retires, and they don't have a very obvious way to continue to be a contending team, right? So,
Yeah.
I think the picks really make sense, and I don't know that the Knicks have the picks to make that make sense, I guess, you know.
My thought too. And so just a technical question, because when Checkits was here back in I guess that was late November. It was late November, early December.
Okay.
He said that bit of a flex, but he was like, I went to a golf outing where Danny Ainge was there, and he gave the impression that he's really not involved in a lot of the day-to-day of the front office. So when we come at this from like, oh, Danny Ainge's demands and what Danny Ainge is doing, like he's not, he might have the final say, but he's not as in the weeds. Is that to from your perspective?
Yeah, you know, and it's hard to know like how much is at the direction of Danny Ainge versus not. But you know, when the Donovan Mitchell conversations were happening with New York, Danny Ainge wasn't the one picking up the phone and dialing. You know, it's not like Danny Ainge was dialing Leon Rose. It's you know, Justin Zanuck, who's the general manager, I guess, under Danny Ainge's. He's got the CEO title of Jazz basketball. And then, you know, other guys in their front office who know, right, like who know Gerson, right? And like Justin Zanuck and Gerson go back, and you know, so like that's where kind of those conversations are happening. And I think some of that is because teams do find it difficult to negotiate with Danny Ainge, right? Like there is kind of a reputation there that, you know, hey, if you're talking to someone who, you know, again, the assistant GM or the GM or whatever, right? Like you may feel like you can get further in conversations or be more open or be more real about what your team's demands are. You know, that being said, by all accounts, the negotiations with the Knicks didn't go that well. So, you know, like it's kind of interesting to think about how this actually happens. But yeah, I mean, kind of that is my understanding as well, is like when teams are talking to the Jazz and not just the Knicks, it's usually someone else in the organization who's actually having those conversations rather than Danny. And then, you know, they say that, hey, it's a collaborative thing. We all get together and make the choice, which, you know, does make sense. But ultimately, Danny Ainge is CEO and has the backing of Ryan Smith in a way that no one else in the front office does.
Well, these next two questions, also from Dom Cappuccini, reference the next guy I wanted to discuss. So the next guy I wanted to discuss was Jordan Clarkson, and Dom asks again, thank you, Dom, so much for your generosity. Knicks trade question. Would you predict that it would take, what would you predict that it would take for Leon Rose to pry Jordan Clarkson or Colin Sexton? These are the other two guys, I should say, that I wanted to discuss. If we are talking Mitch or Deuce, I would be a fan just saying thank you for coming by, Andy. He also adds the correction. I would not be a fan of said theoretical deal. He would not want to do this. It's important for me to make clear for Discord reasons. Shout out to the Knicks Film School Discord. So, I mean, Jordan Clarkson is, let me not guess. Jordan Clarkson is 32 years old. Significantly high usage, not the greatest efficiency. But is one of the better bench players in the league, or at least is known for being one of the bench players in the league. One of the left remaining players from that core that went to the playoffs all those years with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. What's the plan with Jordan Clarkson? What do you see in his future? And I guess to Dom's question, are the Knicks a potential trade partner again?
You know, if the Knicks are willing to offer something, I think the Jazz would be interested. You know, Jordan has thought he would be traded for the last two deadlines.
Okay.
Because, you know, his name is in these conversations and his agent is keeping him apprised and telling him that he is part of these conversations. And it's not, I don't think that the Jazz have been unwilling to sell him. It's not like he's the only veteran they want to keep. It's that they haven't received really much in return. Like it just either a contract of the same length and a different player, or a worse contract, or They're not. We're talking about like 1 second rounder in a way that I don't think that really appeals to the Jazz unless it's a really good second rounder, right? Like last year they traded Simone Fontecchio for the number 31 pick, basically, right? The Detroit second rounder the next year, which is a good pick, and ultimately got them Kyle Filipowski, who again I think is a useful, good young player. I think it would take something like that where you don't have to bowl Danny Ainge over with the first round pick or anything, but something of value. And I do think, like Mitch or Deuce would make some sense there, right? Like
Mitch more so than Deuce because of the money. Although actually, who makes more? Clarkson makes 14.
Yeah.
So I have to double check with Mitchell Robinson.
And I don't know Mitchell Robinson's contract number off the top of my head. But I mean, yeah, regardless, like if you can find a matching contract on a younger guy who with value, and I think, frankly, if the Jazz have a young backup center, I think that's probably good. I guess, how old is Mitchell Robinson now, though, right? Like he
is 26 years old. So they both make. So I believe Mitch makes like $100,000 more than Jordan Clarkson, which allows the Knicks to avoid that second apron hit if they want to do that.
And they're both 2-year deals. So yeah, like honestly, I think that makes sense if the Knicks want to make that swap. My other thought is, I think Mitchell Robinson's probably a better player than Jordan Clarkson right now.
Probably, yeah.
So
I guess the hope would be the jumping to a contending team bump. You take the risk with that. Like we saw that last year with the Knicks. You mentioned the Fontecchio trade. The Knicks also made a trade with the Pistons for Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks. And Bojan started to figure it out toward the end of the regular season. And Alec Burks was a dud for the regular season and then a playoff hero in the playoffs. Just got put into the rotation. It's like, oh, this is the guy we thought we traded for. And then during the Pacers, like, oh, wow, we got a guy hitting 4 threes a game again. Awesome.
Yeah. Which is funny, both of those guys are former Jazz players and players I know well and interview.
That's right. Yeah.
Over and over again, right? Like, and yeah, so it was funny to see the Knicks acquire them, and kind of to me, those guys are better players than Jordan Clarkson right now. Maybe not. Maybe Bojan might be washed. We'll see. But like, heck, AB is not young either. But Jordan Clarkson's also 32, and you can tell that he's not as explosive or slippery as he used to be.
Yeah, that's the tricky part about the Knicks is that because of how many assets went out and what they've built with this team, they need to make sure they nail whatever move they have left with the assets they have left for this year.
Mm-hmm.
And B, there's a Tom Thibodeau calculation. It's like, well, if you trade for him, will he play him? Like, does he trust him? And every potential 8th or 9th man that showed up, it's like, oh, well, Matt Ryan, like, he's just a warm body to give OG Anunoby 10 minutes off, so he's not playing 40 minutes a game. And Matt Ryan gets taken out of the rotation. Now Landry Shamet and Campaign were put back into the rotation. Campaign was playing like 15 minutes. He hasn't played the last 3 second halves, I believe. And Landry Shamet, since coming back, I believe he's only played in like minutes that matter. He's only played like 7-8 minutes. So, we'll see what happens if they were to make the Clarkson thing. I'll be honest with you, Dom and Andy. Like, I'll believe the Knicks do business with a clutch client when they do business with a clutch client. That's just I know what was reported, that they made good and that everything's good. I now just need to see it happen first, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, so clutch is in play. Which, look, I thought that about Brooklyn for the longest time, that the Knicks would never make a move with Brooklyn, and they made one of the biggest moves in franchise history with the Brooklyn Nets. So obviously can happen. I just want to see it happen before I start calculating it.
I'll also say real quick to Dom's question, Colin Sexton's a much better player. And
so that's the other guy I wanted to ask about, because his numbers are very impressive. He's 24 years old. And I don't know, in my old school thinking, I understand the salary cap's a thing, but you turn a 24-year-old's career around that you traded Donovan Mitchell for, and he starts to find a home in productivity. He's part of the solution to your team eventually. I understand what's in the draft. I understand what it is going forward, but I wouldn't be so ready to trade a guy like that. So my question is, like, how is anyone in the front office thinking the way I'm thinking about Colin Sexton?
I don't think so. I agree. Like on paper, that would be a guy that you would probably value a little bit more. But it's funny because he's, first of all, just the most likable dude and works so hard. It is like the famous Colin Sexton videos of like him just being an annoying asshole on the free throw line or whatever, right? Like are true. Like he's just, even on a 7-24 team that has no chance and is like explicitly said they're tanking. He still is like fighting every possession. It's in an insane way. He also, that direction of his goodness, like kind of doesn't mesh with how the Jazz want to play. Like, and in particular, he's pretty bad at like understanding game plans and running plays.
Oh wow.
Like he's sometimes does what the coaching staff wants, but a lot of times it's early shot clocks, mid-range stuff. It's just like, hey, it's Jordan Clarkson time, or I mean, it's Colin Sexton time. And then defensively, like, is extremely focused one-on-one, and then you ask him to help, and he's just not going to do it. And also is, I think he's listed at 6'3", and I think 3 inches of that is probably his hair. Like he is pretty small.
Okay.
And so I think the Jazz, like, I think he would be a really pretty good 6-man on a good team like the Knicks. He can shoot, he can finish, he's fast, he cares, he tries hard, like he brings in that infusion of energy. I don't think that like he is a starting piece for, on a good Jazz team or on a good Knicks team, or because of kind of those issues. And so I do think, again, you could trade for Colin Sexton. I think, the pick swap would have to be part of that conversation, and then young players would make sense. But again, it's whether or not that value is there. I do, again, and can you beat the other offers in the league? The Lakers would make some sense. But again, the contract is not, the contract is probably fair, right? Like the contract is, he's I think it's paid 17 or 18. Like that is probably what he deserves. He's paid 18.3 right now. And so you're not getting huge surplus value. And again, you have to send out an $18 million contract, and that's probably a good player.
Yeah. Well, I'm personally, as much as I've enjoyed our conversation today, I don't necessarily see a trade partner in the Knicks and the Jazz. The Clarkson thing is interesting. Hearing from you firsthand that this would be like buying low on a guy, especially if it's for trading Mitchell Robinson. You might want to just see what Mitchell Robinson has left rather than going to see what Jordan Clarkson has left, because of what you might need in the playoffs when guarding a Joel Embiid or guarding a Giannis Antetokounmpo. And look, if you're dreaming big, Knicks fans, a Nikola Jokic in the finals, so
and I'd also say, like,
we'll see.
The Knicks offense is, are you guys still first in the league?
Second, but like right there. Like we're one of the two teams averaging 120 per 100 possessions.
So when I look at the Knicks and kind of what their needs are, it's not more points. It's not Jordan Clarkson, right?
Like, right. It's in defense. It's depth. It's a warm body that Tom Thibodeau trusts. Someone that can, and we're talking like 15 to 20 minutes a game. You know the irony? Yeah. You know who the Knicks could probably use right now? Alec Burks. Like a guy like that we know Tom Thibodeau trusts, that he will give a long leash to try and figure it out. They could play 15 to 20 minutes. And he's in Miami, who is never trading with the New York Knicks. I don't even care what the Knicks did this summer with Brooklyn or what they did last year with Toronto, who was in civil court with them. Like, that is never happening. So, yeah.
I mean, look, Jordan Clarkson's available. It's just like whether or not the contracts make sense.
Yeah. So, last question, and this is I've started to do this lately. I want to know from an outsider's perspective something about the market that I'm talking to. And in New York we have 2 baseball teams and 2 football teams, and then some claim the team that's right next to Canada, the Buffalo, as like one of the other New York teams. And we have a bunch of hockey teams and a bunch of basketball teams, obviously. And then I look at Utah, and it's like the Jazz, and now a hockey team that's literally called the hockey team. And I'm curious about like the year-round nature of covering the Jazz and how the fan base treats a team that has told, like, in its market that it has to itself, how its fan base reacts and covers, or not really covers, and follows a team that has said from day one, hey, this season's not going to matter. Like, how have you seen the fan base kind of really just survive and react to this season?
I mean, like, we get to look at page view counts on articles, right? Like, just as an example, and those are down significantly, right? Like, I'm probably getting less than half would be my estimate of the page views I got when the Jazz were good. That being said, like, there is still, because the Jazz are the only game in town, people are still paying attention to a pretty impressive degree, right? Like, they're still selling out the Delta Center every night. In a way that, like, even a lot of markets with good teams can't sell out every night. The Delta Center is full, like, not only just selling out, but actually full every night, which is really kind of cool. There is still interest in talking about it on sports radio, and people are asking me when the Jazz are going to be better, and people are worried about it, right? Like, and it is still like, I don't know if it's the biggest game in town, because there's also like college football, which is huge here. But it is, it is right up there, and there's still huge interest. Even with the hockey team kind of being more, I don't know that they've taken any of that, but like, they're certainly more playoff competitive than the Jazz are. The page views for the hockey team are not as high as the basketball team, right? Like, it is, again, in the half to a third range of what the interest is. And but yeah, we'll see how much that evolves, and like whether or not people learn the NHL. I don't think Utah was a hockey town before this all happened. But yeah, it is funny because people are paying attention and focusing to the Jazz year round, even when the team has been bad the last 2 years, will be bad the next 2 years. Like, it is still a topic of conversation.
That's interesting. Again, we have a different perspective, for at least especially as a Knicks fan, because like I'm trying, one of my New Year's resolutions is to try and not just besmirch the Brooklyn Nets as much as I have. I'd be nicer in 2025. But the reality is, and I it's mostly informed from what I did before, like doing this full time. But like, I used to work retail. I used to work at a sporting goods store. And the question I never got in 10 years working in retail was, can you point me to the direction of the Brooklyn Nets stuff? Like, we got a ton of Knicks stuff, ton of Yankee stuff. The baseball seasons are kind of mixed, but the point I'm trying, where I was going with this is that when the Knicks were bad, like when they the year that they lost 65 games and got RJ Barrett, like, Knicks fans had the Yankees to turn to, had football to turn to, had hockey to turn to, like, had other sports to be like, hey, just get me to blank season and you will have done your job. Like, that's honestly what football season has been for New York for the last couple of years. Just get me to the Knicks and you'll be fine. And then the Knicks, just get me to baseball and you'll be fine. And thankfully the Knicks have, been good enough to get us into baseball season, which has been great. But the market of one teams, it's just it's a different reality than us Yankees up here in New York. And I'm intrigued by the Jazz because I said this the last time we previewed this. I like the coach. I like we haven't mentioned the name Lauri Markkanen really in this episode, and I think he's like one of the more underrated players in the sport, probably.
Yeah.
And they just have a lot of young, intriguing pieces and 3 first-round picks in this upcoming draft. It's supposed to be stacked, and it's this is the eat your vegetables season where they're 7-24. So
yep, agreed. And we'll see. I could see there being another eat your vegetables season after that, so to speak, and to try to get AJ DeBanza or Cam Boozer or Darren Peterson, right? Like, I don't know that this is going to be a quick coming out of the rebuild process, but they just extended Will Hardy, who I agree, I think is a really good coach. I think Danny Ainge is a good GM, and I think, like, directionally, tanking was probably the right thing for the Jazz to do after the Donovan and Rudy thing fell apart so catastrophically. But now you're in the dog days of the tank, and it's gonna be a while, and that's just the reality of how long the process takes.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, that process, at least for right now in the immediacy, is a trip to New York City on New Year's Day to play the New York Knicks. And we'll see if the Jazz can snap their 4-game losing streak or improve their lottery odds. I assume I know what Jazz fans want to happen tonight, and I know it's the exact same thing that Knicks fans want, to the Knicks to extend their winning streak to 9 games before this matchup against OKC, who's won 12 straight on Friday night. So we'll see what happens. Andy, you've been so good with your time. Thank you so much for joining me. Before you get out of here, please let the fine folks at home know where they can find you and all your stuff.
Yeah, I work for the Salt Lake Tribune, and I am at Andy B. Larsen on Twitter, and also, I guess, Blue Sky now.
Oh, that's right. We have that other one that
now I just have to post 2 places.
It's really, I found an app that lets me multi-purpose post, and it's like I hit all 4. It's Instagram, Threads, Twitter, and Blue Sky, and then like I couldn't tell you the last time I've actually logged into half of these things, but I recognize this space requires us to do all of the above. So hopefully it stops there. Andy, thank you so much for joining me again. Happy New Year. And thank you to everybody for tuning in to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. We do this every game day, so come on back the next time the Knicks play, except tomorrow, because we will be doing our pregame pod for the Thunder on Thursday. So stay tuned for the time on that. I'll get back to you soon. Andrew Schlecht of the Down to Dunk podcast and The Athletic will be joining me to preview this matchup against the Thunder, Isaiah Hartenstein and the Oklahoma City Thunder. But thank you for tuning in. If you dig the show, head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video. Remember to subscribe. As I mentioned, I'll be back to preview the game against the Thunder on Thursday at some point. But until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight, and I'll speak with you soon. Peace.